p.m. It's actually slightly after 5 p.m., which most importantly means that it's afternoon in New Zealand, so we can enjoy a beer. So cheers, everyone. We know that we stand between you guys and having a beer, so we're going to be quick, and hopefully we'll be a little bit entertaining. I wanted to start off, in the past few months, we've had this sort of exponential growth in the number of open source initiatives and foundations that seem to be cropping up. We've obviously got the OpenStack Foundation, we've got the OCI, the CNCF, the FML, the FFS, and I believe that the WTF Foundation is soon to be announced. What's actually going on, and have we reached peak foundation?
There's a lot more acronyms left. So
yeah, I guess there are.
The sky is still the limit.
But I mean, seriously though, like customers are confused. Back in the old days, customers understood that the reason we had sort of monolithic proprietary vendors is they could buy a suite of products from a vendor and understand how it all worked together. And we're now trying to sell them 65 different flavors of open source initiative, and there's all this veiled competition between those initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not so sure there, because I think what we're seeing, first of all, I think OpenStack is a model for many of these other foundations that are being formed, because what we've proven has been that by working together across all of the different competing companies, we can actually do this. And so I think the other foundations and initiatives that are coming up are trying to emulate that. And I think that is in the customer's interest, because now they can get a solution without being locked into a single vendor.
I disagree. I mean, it feels like it's headed the direction. It feels like it's headed the direction of web services and SOA. Does anybody remember that fiasco? Like, I mean, there's too many vendors sitting around the table trying to figure out what to do, and everybody trying to carve out their little piece of the territory. Mine too, and it's a little frustrating, actually.
But Andy, you'd rather go back to where a single vendor is going to dictate everything?
But saying the OpenStack Foundation is like a model for success in that regard, that's a low bar, man.
Well, let's. So I'm actually with Lew.
So before Dus talks, so Dus is standing in for Diane. So Dus is from Intel, and Intel is behind every single initiative, open source initiative under the sun, including the WTF initiative that's soon to be announced. So your perspective, Mr. Kamhout.
Yeah, so I think the key difference that we're seeing right now, so everybody's familiar with standards bodies. There's lots of them. We'll probably find there's many acronyms on standards bodies as what we're seeing in these new foundations. The key distinction is the new ones are leading with code. The old ones led by a lot of people with PhDs arguing from their vendor perspective about what a standard should be, and actually moved fairly slow. So I mean, I'm still all for standards. I think it's good, but I think the key difference is what we saw is OpenStack was a good start to show, hey, we're going to lead with code. Maybe not everything in the model is perfect, but with the CNCF, it's actually showing how do we do schedulers. The Open Container Initiative is actually focused on the container runtimes, where we do have a battle or issue going on between Rocket versus Docker. So to me, the key difference is these are leading by code, and if you look closely at all of them, that's the key point versus, hey, let's just lead by white papers and specs, which we know have not actually netted out a perfect situation
Ben,
for us.
I think you're right. I mean, it is confusing for customers only because of the speed at which it's moving. Standards bodies actually standardize things after the fact.
Sure.
Very long after. We had an incubation period of years and years while we had the debates, and then we settled upon a standard. What we're seeing now by leading with code, they have a choice. Do they want to jump on that, or do they want to let things sort of settle out before they adopt it? And right now, I think the customers are saying that they get to make that decision, and some are saying they need to be right there, and they actually need to be participating by contributing code as well.
Running code, rough consensus, and market adoption.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting. So a wise troll by the name of Ben Black once said that the only standard that matters is the one that's hewn from the crucible of real-life work.
Yes.
And, one could argue that, yeah, we're better now that we're leading by code, but we're still too early because we're announcing foundations when, yeah, there's a little bit of code, but no one's using it. So at what point is the right time? And there's all this tension, Cloud Foundry, when was the right time to have a foundation? Docker, when was the right time to have a foundation? At what point is it the right time, and what time is it just more confusion for the marketplace?
The $60,000 question.
Well, I think you actually have to start earlier enough. So Kubernetes was a hit at 1.0. Mesos has been at least 3 years in. So the whole concept of schedulers is at a nice point where we can say if you look across the entire data center, or if you look at app orchestration, we have enough in the model, in the architecture, and the primitives that we can actually say, hey, here's how the code should look, and actually start moving this forward. If we waited, my biggest concern is if we waited another year, the empires and fiefdoms and fighting over like whose schedule is it would be way too noisy. Same thing with the container initiative. If we just let that battle go on that started around Amsterdam, sure. Docker time.
Yeah, I mean, OCI is seemingly a good resolution to the, kind of tension between
it's not perfect either, right?
Two players in that ecosystem.
And one thing you should notice too, think about all the standards bodies that have done stuff in closed doors, behind closed doors. What we're seeing now with OCI is it's all happening out in public. You can actually join the argument and like argue between Solomon and Brandon about, hey, which method is best. It's all happening in the public. So I think that's important.
The interesting thing though, so Sam Ramji around LinuxCon time, or OSCON I think, wrote a blog post and gave a presentation saying how the speed of innovation, proprietary can't keep up, open source, it's the blossoming of open source, and it's sort of the end of those sort of commercial tensions. That's, I wouldn't say naive because Sam's a super smart guy, he knows what he's saying, but that kind of draws a curtain a little bit over the reality, which is that you've now got, rather than commercial bodies or commercial organizations arguing over what's going on, you now have open source foundations arguing over what's going on. And so have we actually achieved anything, or have we just put up this sort of quasi-nice, let's all have a love fest and sing Kumbaya?
Well, the thing is that, I feel like when we form the foundations too early, I'm going to keep disagreeing, and when you've got too many vendors around the table trying to get agreement on a thing, then what happens is that you don't make any forward progress, right? If you look at like different alternative structures like the Apache Software Foundation, which is a different kind of organization than say OpenStack, people are able to kind of own a piece, like, Yahoo kind of owned, Hadoop, at least in the initial days. And okay, that's fine, but it didn't own the Apache Software Foundation, and you were able to see things like Hadoop compete with things like Cassandra or whatever in the marketplace, and you have real market dynamics, right? It's very hard to apply market dynamics when these foundations, form too early, and you can't really get any consensus around what to do because everybody's taking the same thing, in this case OpenStack, and taking it to market, but the thing is actually different when the customer gets it. So the customer thinks they're getting OpenStack, whatever that is, and then they get a thing that's that person's OpenStack, and it doesn't look like all the rest.
So do you think then the carnage, and we have seen carnage in the OpenStack ecosystem in the past few months, there's been some failures, some exits that maybe were failures, and maybe some exits arguably that were positive and good for all concerned. But maybe, do you think we're going to learn from that, and the OCI and the CNCF aren't going to see a million different flavors of venture-funded organization that are doing the same thing?
The marketplace will decide. We're absolutely all agreed upon that, I'm sure. And that I think what we're presenting to the marketplace is, in open source, I actually think that you made a great point, which is that we're seeing open source initiatives competing with each other for adoption in the marketplace. I don't see that as bad. I see that as exactly what you want to have take place. And then we will see consolidation happen, because as people rally around those that survive, move forward, that I think is the standard part. And we're just seeing the shift, I think, of that happening now in open source communities, whereas before you were seeing that in different proprietary vendors.
We don't see it as bad because we're in the industry, but the customers out there who have to adopt one of these things and then get told, screw you, we've been sold to some horrible monolithic proprietary vendor that you're trying to get away from. No disrespect to you and your owner,
this is the way it's always been, Ben, right? The very first power plant was DC, not AC. I mean, it's the way the world works.
Yeah, but I think under the model we've got now, and OpenStack is a good example. How many, and I've talked to customers who were kind of left in limbo post, whether it was cloud scaling or MetaCloud or Pistol or whoever, because they bought into a vision, and they bought this vision of 1,000 flowers blooming and it all being beautiful, and we're all going to sing Kumbaya and be happy. But someone forgot to tell them that actually those venture capitalists want a return, and if the revenue's not coming, then she's all over it.
Life is
Fortunately, I think there's other OpenStack vendors that will gladly pick up and support those customers, and that's the advantage of doing it in the community and it's open source. Because whereas we're not perfect in terms of there are differences in some of the distributions, it's very, very minor compared to the big differences we've seen between the previous set of platforms, whether it be Unix and Microsoft. Those are very big changes when, if one of those vendors went out, that customer would be screwed. So now I think we're in a much better shape here where we've eliminated a lot of that vendor lock-in. And we should be proud of that. I mean, I think that there still is a certain amount because you want to trust your vendor. But overall, we've made it better for our customers, I think, in response to their needs.
Yeah, I actually hope that there's going to be a bunch of vendors that start up Kubernetes support systems. I actually hope there's a bunch of vendors that will go and create Mesos. The reason why, has anybody looked at the Linux options of distributions, how many have been created and fallen apart? It's huge. The tree is gigantic, ones you've never even heard of. You do usually end up with a couple, but the whole point is you need that wide range of people trying things, creating things in a broad industry so that we can actually handle the scale of the world. There's so many things.
And let Darwinism happen.
And that's why you've got a cosmetic that's been set up to deliver Kubernetes when Kubernetes is being delivered by Google, and that doesn't make any sense, but that's the way this new world works. So I guess the other thing is, you could argue that in the OpenStack ecosystem, we've basically seen a situation where, with the utmost respect, the three dinosaurs represented on the stage here, I can say that after half a beer, have acquired one or more vendors or one or more distro providers or producers, and there's the last man standing, which is Mirantis arguably, and a few others around the side, and obviously IBM's got Blue Box, AJC. And is it going to be the same? Is there going to be kind of one and last independent man standing for all of these initiatives, and you guys will buy up the others? Or?
Just the record, we didn't acquire any of them.
True, but you're involved with every single. Well, you funded Mirantis, so you're kind of.
I don't make any forward-leaning statements.
Nice.
No, but I think the whole point there is you need a wide range of people to show up. We have a shortage of hiring people. I mean, all of us do. I guarantee, we're hiring 100 people to go to San Antonio. It's hard to find those people. That's
because no one wants to go to San Antonio.
I know.
I've been there a bunch of times. It's horrible.
We need people in Portland, too. Portland's awesome. We have great beer. But, fundamentally, we need more people willing to step into the space in order to have all those people. You actually need people, funding the work to actually happen so, we can push the tech forward.
Sure. Are there any questions from the audience for these luminaries before we? You can hire anywhere. There you go. Anywhere in Texas, because it's bigger there. OpenStack in Texas is really, really big.
We don't have a link to Mars yet, so.
Any questions before we carry on opining? Existential question.
Those are the best at 5 o'clock.
After seeing the notebooks downstairs about the early days of semiconductors, I mean, I've heard or I've read that we're near the last couple of stages of getting the line widths down. And it seems to me that OpenStack has been very much driven by the advances in semiconductor. And back a few years ago, I thought that all the app guys were going to have to worry about multi-threading and all this stuff. I think the OpenStack, the Dockers, and all that have allowed application guys to get away from worrying too much about multi-threading. Maybe some, but it's
So basically, your question is: Have we kind of reached the end state?
Are we reaching the end of that, and therefore is that going to affect OpenStack going forward? Are we going to be able to keep innovation going?
Well, I guess the broader question is: will we ever reach an end state, any sort of end state in the technology industry?
No, of course not. But we are nearing the end of Moore's law in the traditional sense of the LSI technology. But what we're seeing is happening in the software layers is at the other end of that, which is seeing that more and more we're seeing these, like we said, microservices, software is taking over more and more different vertical industries. And so that's happening at the other end of this. And that's where there's still tremendous economies that you can get by operating at scale. I'm sure Randy, would agree that we can talk about when you move things to a cloud, you can start to do many different things. And that's where I think we're going to see it. So we're no longer just dependent upon Moore's law being the engine for innovation. I think the internet's true engine for innovation, and that's what we're seeing cloud computing take advantage of.
Sure. There was one more question back there we've got time for before we We've even got a microphone. Wow, modern technology.
Yeah, my question was actually directed at Randy. So one thing that you've mentioned a couple of times is that all these OpenStack distributions need to be consistent. But how would your company and other distributions or players in that area differentiate themselves in that case? How would there be market differentiation in your idea of an ideal OpenStack, right?
Logos.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to differentiate, right? It doesn't necessarily mean in features. You know, in my presentations, I take a hard line, right? Differentiation as silos, infrastructure has zero value. I'm taking those hard lines to make you like question, to think about it. I don't think that infrastructure has zero value. I think it has very low value relative to, you know, where things are in the business stack, right? It's the same thing with differentiation, right? You can differentiate on service and support, rack space fanatical support. You can differentiate on performance. You can differentiate on cost. There are many, many, many ways to differentiate that aren't necessarily about having, you know, a feature that is specific to what you're doing that nobody else has. That sounds good. It sounds really good on paper, right? You can put a patent on it and blah, 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 blah. But for certain parts of the system, you know, the universe being a system, the earth being another system, you know, for clouds, you need the common underlying substrate to be the same, right? Think about it this way. If I had a table here and I had like 10 different items, all of which had completely different power requirements, DC, AC, 12 volts, 5 volts, 208, 120, and I required the power company to deliver power natively for each of those devices, I'm blowing everything up. Power is now too expensive. The power company's cost model is bad, right? Their margins are fat though, right? But if, on the other hand, we turn around and there's a standard and, you know, power is delivered everywhere, their margins are lower, but now you've got this ubiquitous power standard that everybody can use. That is what we need. That's how power works. That's how TCP/IP works. Gas, you know, I mean, the whole shebang.
What other power options do you have?
No.
So how many
these guys are going to fight at the end. So we're nearing the end of our time. So what we're going to do, it's kind of a douchey question, but it's the end of the day, so I can get away with that. 5 years since OpenStack started, we've come a long way. You know, no matter who you are, you agree that we've come a long way. What are we going to be sitting here talking about in 5 years' time? What's OpenStack going to look like, and what's the broader OpenStack or the broader ecosystem going to look like? 30 seconds, starting with you, Lew.
It's going to escape the data center. The opportunity is much larger than single data centers, which is the way we think about OpenStack today. These have to move to a higher level, particularly as we connect into a larger number of devices.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say OpenStack is still the brownfield, greenfield bridge for infrastructure. APIs will be key, but what's underneath and what's above will be extremely dynamic. We'll see.
I'm not sure I want to answer this question. I'm worried that it's going to be the same thing I've been talking about since 5 years, pretty much at the launch of OpenStack. And, you know, I feel like I've been saying the same thing over and over for 5 years, and we've made very little progress. And I hope that I'm just wrong. I hope in this case I'm just dead wrong. And I hope that we're sitting here on the stage talking about like a standardized version of OpenStack and how much traction we've got, and not about how the container ecosystem has basically clocked us.
What we do know is that Randy's going to have a 5-year-old running around the yard. So best of luck with your impending arrival.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And let's go enjoy a beer.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
So don't leave just yet. Stay here for 30 seconds. I want to do a very quick recap of some of the major events. First of all, Mirantis got a $100 million funding round from Intel, which is great. Secondly, Ben announced the creation of the World Technology Foundation, the WTF. The announcement that remains is the official legal representation for that foundation will be Morrison and Forster at mofo.com. So we have a set of real heavyweights in the industry, I think, coming together, and that's, I think, really what the next 5 years holds. So a couple of quick things. Cocktails are obviously downstairs. The Computer History Museum is being opened up just for us all, which is pretty amazing. In terms of synergies, they've decided that you can have your drinks, but you can't take it into the museum. So there is no synergy. So much for that. All right, we will see you tomorrow bright and early for another astounding day. Thank you guys all again.
Thanks, Jerry.